Welcome to the fifth episode of the Mendez Movie Report Podcast, covering film news that caught my interest for the week of May 25th, 2026. I'm your host and namesake film critic, Louis A. Mendez. If you want to check out more of my work, you can visit MendezMovieReport.com or find me on all social media, whether it be Letterboxd, X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Reddit, or even Award Expert Gold Derby, all under Mendez Movie RPT. And I sure hope everybody had a great Memorial Day weekend. I wish I could say that I had a great one. It wasn't a bad one. I just didn't really end up resting as much as I wish I could, and kind of ended up being on the back foot on certain things I had to get done, including getting this podcast recorded. I had been hoping to record it before the weekend was over, but unfortunately, I got dragged to a foodie festival of sorts that ended up being much farther than we thought it was. Ended up being under the blazing Florida sun. We only ended up staying there for like about 30 minutes, and the food was not bad, but nothing special either. But hey, at least it was free to get in. But that sort of, if you've ever been in that situation where you go somewhere, you walk around all over the place, the sun is beaming down on you, that will exhaust you. And I ended up, unfortunately, having to delay both the weekly digest and this podcast episode by a day because of Memorial Day, the holiday, on top of being way too tired to get stuff done. But anyhow, we're finally here. And on this episode, for the week of May 25th, 2026, I will be reviewing Star Wars The Mandalorian and Grogu. I'll recap the fall coming out of this year's Cannes Film Festival, including certain arguments that have broke out already regarding the neon streak and the Cannes winner maybe not being the most beloved winner in comparison to the last couple of years. Netflix has big plans for the adventures of Cliff Booth. The Daniels might have their lead for their next film. Park Chan-Wook's Western is looking stacked. Wild news that a fourth Godfather movie is in the works. Paul Schrader apparently even creeps on fake women. And of course, looking at the latest box office news, along with what's coming next to theaters and streaming. So let's get going. It is going to be a stacked episode. And some people argue that Devil Wears Prada 2 was the unofficial kickoff to the summer blockbuster season. Other people argued that it was Mortal Kombat 2. I was among those people. But hey, it's for Memorial Day weekend. That's a pretty strong case to call that the unofficial start to the summer blockbuster season. And just in time for talking about the summer blockbuster season, I actually had a conversation over at the Watchdog Morning Show, based off of West Virginia, talking to Howard more about the upcoming summer slate of movies and some of the big titles that are coming over the next 3 months. I will link that to the show notes so people can check out that segment that I did. But for Memorial Day weekend this year, the big movie ended up being Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu. And unfortunately, Disney did not provide a press screening for this one. For here in my neck of the woods of Tampa Bay, Florida, so I had to go seek this out on a Friday afternoon after work, and juggle getting to write about it while dealing, keeping up with Cannes, raising a newborn, Memorial Day weekend. If you caught my previous podcast episode, I was in the minority and I was not a big fan of last weekend's big new release Obsession, which has ended up becoming this massive thing by itself. One of the big successes of the year, objectively, regardless of my subjective opinion on it. Well, for the second straight week in a row, I feel like I walked out of a new movie feeling like I somehow attended a different screening than everyone else did, especially online. Because honestly, Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu is the most fun I've had with a Star Wars movie since The Force Awakens. And maybe the first one in years that I actually remembered that these movies are supposed to feel like adventurous crowd pleasers first and lordoms and fan service second. Look, maybe part of it comes down to the fact that I've never actually watched 1 second of the Disney Plus series, The Mandalorian. Granted, I probably have seen some clips. Everyone's seen the memes. Everyone remember when Baby Yoda exploded into the mainstream. Um, but I went into this movie almost completely detached from the larger sort of Mandoverse lore. Um, any endless callbacks, or whatever expectations longtime fans have built up coming into this movie. So instead of spending the movie comparing it to episodes of television, or trying to figure out where it slots into the wider canon, I just kind of let the movie. I kind of just experienced it as its own thing, and as its own thing, I do think it's a blast. What surprised me most was how quickly the movie got me invested in the dynamic between Mando and Grogu. And granted, I am belated at this compared to other people who have spent years watching these two via the streaming series, but having actually seen it now, it's a really good dynamic between this bounty hunter and this little Yoda dude. Um, I obviously knew who these characters were through cultural osmosis, but actually sitting down and watching them together for 2 hours won me over. There's a lot of fun and sincerity in the relationship that keeps the movie grounded, even when it gets goofy or chaotic. Pedro Pascal continues to prove that he can create an emotional connection through body language and voice work alone, while Grogu was brought to life thanks to some amazing puppeteering, by the way. It's just as charming and cute as the years of online discussion about the show promise he'd be. And honestly, this movie is loaded with the exact kind of Star Wars stuff I love seeing on screen. Weird aliens, strange little critters running around in the background. There's these little like critters who I guess are like um they're almost like these little, I almost want to say gremlins that fix ships and stuff. And for me, they kind of stole the show. Dusty planets, shady bars with danger, rusty ships that look like they've actually lived through something. There's a tangible sense of adventure throughout this entire film that I feel has been missing from a lot of modern franchise filmmaking, especially when it comes to Star Wars. So many big blockbusters today feel overly polished and sterile, but this movie embraces the messy lived in quality that I think made the original trilogy feel special in the first place. More than anything, The Mandalorian and Grogu reminded me of the kind of sci-fi adventure movies I grew up loving in the 80s and early 90s. The pacing is fast, the action scenes are easy to follow, and there's this playful energy running through the whole thing that kept a smile on my face for most of the runtime. The film just wants to take you on a fun ride through a galaxy full of strange worlds and lovable characters. That's not to say the movie is perfect. There are definitely moments where the plot feels a little thin, and a few emotional beats rely heavily on pre-existing attachment to these characters. I can also understand why some people wanted something bigger, more ambitious. When we're having Star Wars finally return to theaters for the first time in 7 years, this is some grand epic on the scale of Empire Strikes Back or Revenge of the Sith. It's much smaller and simpler than that, and this lacks those films' cinematic gloss, which in turn can help make it feel like you're just watching something that could have been just a straight to Disney Plus special, and you just happen to be watching it on the big screen. Um, I do think, and I'm just kind of going off of my notes, away from my notes here for a quick second. I do think that the fact that I hadn't watched the show helped me to enjoy this more than people who have seen the show, which is weird to say, but I think because I've never watched the show, I didn't get that feeling of, oh, I'm just watching back to back episodes of The Mandalorian on the big screen. Granted, this definitely does not have that cinematic feel. It could definitely feel like something that could be just straight for Disney Plus, but because I hadn't seen the TV show, I was able to kind of vibe with it as kind of its own fun little adventure. And I think that's a big factor as to why I'm higher on this movie than other people are. Um, Look, but for the first time in a while, for me, a Star Wars movie felt comfortable just being an adventure movie. No setup for 5 future projects, no 2 hours of franchise maintenance, no giant nostalgia trap that's desperately trying to recreate all magic beat for beat. Just a straightforward sci-fi journey with fun characters, creative world building, and a sense of excitement. Maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe I just caught this movie in the exact right mood. Maybe had I actually watched the show, I might feel like others do, that I'm just watching back-to-back would-be episodes. But sitting in the theater, watching Mando and Grogu bounce from one dangerous situation to another while surrounded by bizarre creatures, funny little creators, practical-looking worlds, I felt something I haven't felt from Star Wars in a long time. Thus, I am on the higher end of this than most of my colleagues, and I give Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu a B plus. Look, the bar isn't that high, but for me, this is one of the better Star Wars film in the Disney era of the franchise. The 2026 Cannes Film Festival has now come and gone, and Neon's Palme d'Or streak remains intact after what sounded like a very tight race between all of a sudden the Black Ball, Fatherland, Minotaur, and the eventual winner, Fjord. Neon has now won the Palm 7 straight times. And, it's funny. I'm already sensing some backlash bubbling up over it. I mean, honestly, I got tired of the streak a couple years ago, personally. I've been half jokingly, half not. Every year, kind of rooting for Neon to streak to finally end. But I think the longer that it continues, the more detractors are starting to see this streak create. And that's led to some people angrily arguing that audiences and film fans shouldn't treat Neon Streak as something to root for or against, because at the end of the day, the films themselves as art matter more than whatever studio logo is attached to them. And look, that's a worthwhile thought in theory, but the problem is that is a competition. And when one studio goes on a run like this, people are naturally going to start reacting to them the same way sports fans react to a dynasty. If a team keeps winning championships year after year, people eventually start rooting against them. That's just human nature. If people don't want it to devolve into the kind of discourse, then Cam would basically have to stop framing itself as a competition entirely, and that's obviously not going to happen. Until then, especially with Neon themselves openly flexing this streak, people are going to keep talking about it until somebody finally breaks it. At this point, I honestly kind of half jokingly think Can should just tag itself that they're sponsored by Neon. Um, JD Duran over at In Session Film, and I don't understand how there could be a living soul that listens to my podcast and is not aware of In Session Film. But he likes to talk about what happens when you turn art into sport. And the thing is that when you have a situation where Neon is flexing their streak. They're posting memes about it. They're buying up these billboards and massive posters at Cannes, and they've made Cannes their entire identity that we own this festival. We're gonna buy up things at this festival, and this festival is what helps us figure out what we are going to compete with come award season this year. I mean, they've already pulled off having two of their Palm winners go on to win Best Picture. I mean, 2 times in the last 7 years. When you have that, you're going to get people to root against it. And to the people who are offended by this, I just have to tell you, then ignore the competition, because when you have competition, this stuff is going to happen. And when you look, I'm a sports fan, as everybody should know by now, even just 5 episodes in. When you have a studio winning the same thing year after year, you're going to start building up this anticipation and this pressure of this streak. We're kind of getting ready. We want something new. Now, the irony of this is that you're technically kind of getting something new every year. I mean, there's certain movies that Neon gravitate to. They have really decided we're going to be unapologetically for the cinephile, for the international film fan. But, even then, you've had these very different movies that have won Best Picture, have won the Palm for them. And Neon just because it happens to be neon, it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't mean that it's not new. But people are gonna feel like they want something new, especially when you got this, movie who has been like really fighting to be at where neon is. They're basically, you could tell that they basically are using the same neon strategy at the moment of we're gonna go to Cannes, we're gonna pick things up, we want to go for the cinephile. After all, they were born from a streaming service that was geared towards the hardcore cinephile, and and the movie, they're bouncing back after they hit it big with the substance, and then last year, I'm sorry, I just do not understand what made them think that Die My Love was going to be their ticket back to the Oscars. And I remember telling people that I didn't see how it was going to be their ticket back to the Oscar. And unfortunately for them, they had some solid international films. I know there were a lot of people who were big fans of Resurrection. Personally, I was not among them, but I know that there were a lot of big fans of that movie. And then the La Grazia, La Grazia, which was my personal favorite international film from last year. But unfortunately, it was too stacked an international year last year, and Neon took advantage of that because they had all the big international titles. So they're trying to bounce back, and people are kind of like ready to see, will movie finally be what takes down Neon. Now, I think one of the another things that kind of build up this backlash and anger at the Neon streak continuing for some people is that the Cannes winner itself, Fjord. This one is interesting because the movie already seems to be generating some divisive discourse online over its subject, which is, of course, regarding, I guess, sort of these like right wing, very religious parents who suddenly have a threat to have their kids taken away from them. It's that kind of family courtroom drama, from what I'm aware of. And the movie got well received. If you look at the critic scores are good, but not the type of critic scores that we've seen for some other of Neon's top priorities. And it's interesting because of all the letterbox follows, of all the letterbox accounts that I followed that were at Cannes, I was kind of noticing that the passion was really behind All of a Sudden Blackball and Minotaur. Whereas Fjord, it seemed to be like cracking top tens, but not top five, top three, like those other movies were. So there was that other aspect to it. There were other those contenders. All of a sudden, Blackball, Fatherland, Minotaur, they were getting talked up as potential Best Picture contenders. Um, you know, my gut says two or maybe three of those five Cannes titles ultimately are going to make the Oscar lineup. Fjord definitely seems more polarizing than the others right now, but Neon has good experience dealing with these prickly tour films, and even they got Triangle Sadness into Best Picture, which was a movie that was generally well received, but wasn't like a movie that people were that super passionate about, but they were able to get international audiences to go crazy over it, and that passion led to it squeezing into Best Picture. It'll be really interesting to see how the non-Cannes crowd reacts to these films. When they start rolling out publicly, I'm guessing some of these will be showing up, if not all of them, at the fall festivals. Um, and I will say this: Neon knows how to how to push these sort of like tour films. So and they have a history with family dramas and courtroom dramas. So I don't think Fjord's definitely helped by it being Neon's top priority. Though again, I find it interesting that for the second year in a row, they're kind of like, yeah, we're gonna go with a family drama that happens to have Renata Ron's in it. Um, but they do have All of a Sudden, though I do worry if All of a Sudden, which is Ryusuke Hamaguchi's follow-up to Drive My Car, which is one of my favorite films of 2021. But I do wonder, and again, I have not seen the movie for myself, but it is a really long movie, as was Drive My Car, to be fair. And it's a movie that I do wonder if it gets tagged as lesser Drive My Car, because it apparently sort of explores the same themes, but with a different sort of a setup compared to Drive My Car, and different subplots, obviously. Um, We do have Fatherland and Minotaur from Mubi. I don't know if Minotaur's the competitor that other people think it is. I mean, we're talking about what sounds to be a very dark, nihilistic type of movie. Those movies can be tough to get into Best Picture, and even if you get them into Best Picture, that's not going to do well in the preferential ballot. Fatherland, I think, has some hope because it is from a director who has been nominated for Best Director before, and arguably, had there been a hard 10 instead of a sliding scale year, I do believe that movie Cold War would have gotten into Best Picture. And I don't adore Cold War like other people do, but it's the truth. It would have gotten into Best Picture if there were a hard 10. Um, what I think is most interesting is the Black Ball, which was got picked up by Netflix, and I think will end up becoming in time Netflix's top priority. This is a Spanish movie from Spain. It's a sprawling period epic. It crosses time. It's queer cinema, but it's queer cinema from what I hear. It's not your typical queer cinema of from what I hear, it's not, it's not your typical like bury your gaze type of queer cinema, melodramatic and stuff. I hear, from what I understand, this thing is big, it's epic, it's sprawling, it's got musical numbers in it. There's apparently cameos for Penelope Cruz and Glenn Close. This is the one movie coming out of the Cannes Film Festival that I'm super, super excited to check out. This is one of my most anticipated movies for the rest of the year. I think I'm gonna really. I could be wrong. We'll see when I actually see it, but I think I'm gonna really, really vibe with that. I've always loved those kind of big sprawling epics. Brutalist was in my top three. In 2 years ago in 2024, Babylon was top three for me in 2022. So and the others I would say I'm more curious about. I wouldn't say I'm excited like other people I see seem to be excited. I'm more curious about those titles. But I think coming out of Cannes, the verdict to me is that Neon has not sucked up all the international contenders like they did last year. They are, I think, gonna have to put in some work to get Fjord in compared to where they had just uh, way too many ridges for themselves last year. All of a sudden, could be a good plan B for them. Though again, we'll have to see if it doesn't get tagged as lesser drive my car. Mubi, I think, has a more accessible contender this year than they did last year, and I think Netflix made a home run decision by picking up the Black Ball. So that's my take, and I will be, now that the Cannes Film Festival is over, I will be in the next episode unveiling my initial 99th Oscar projections. Because now it's game time. Now things get serious. Oh, and by the way, before I move on to the next subject, I did want to mention it is wild to me that I was on the Oscar race um, Reddit subreddit. I've been trying to be a little bit more. Um, I've been trying to be more active there, just kind of like get involved and stuff instead of just always lurking. And not to mention, some people have taken shots at me on the subreddit over things I said on Twitter. Now they can say it in my face. Um, I am astounded at how many people got on that subreddit while the winners were getting announced, and we're getting pissed off that people were speculating on Oscar potential for these movies. You're in an Oscar race subreddit. I don't know what else to tell you. But regardless, Ken has come and gone, and because of that, I will be unveiling my initial Oscar projections, and I will have that for you guys in the very next episode. And of course, if you are subscribed to my Substack, you will get to see them earlier than the episode than when you get to hear from the episode, because I should be, fingers crossed, getting it out on Friday. The Odyssey, Christopher Nolan's upcoming film, arguably the film of the summer, arguably the front runner to win Best Picture at the outset. The Odyssey has recently come under some truly ridiculous backlash from the predictable crowd led by Elon Musk, who almost certainly has never even read the source material. But he's decided that casting a black woman as Helen of Troy is somehow an offense against morality itself. This is the same man who oversaw millions in cuts to life-saving programs, and this merry band of incels online have even mass disliked the film's trailer on YouTube. Keep in mind that Helen of Troy was not a real person. And unless you take certain pseudo archaeological theories seriously, there's no concrete evidence that Iliad ever happened. For those who are not aware or well read, that is the story that has to deal with the Trojan War. Also, keep in mind that the mythology of the Odyssey includes witches, gods and goddesses, sea serpents, a trip into Hades, and a literal man eating cyclops. But apparently, we're supposed to be outraged over armor designs or casting choices. And apparently, we're also supposed to ignore how gorgeous Lupita Nyong'o is. I'm telling you guys, I'm horrible with names. I'd launch ships toward Troy to get her back too, as far as I'm concerned. And Nyong'o recently responded to the controversy in an interview with Elle magazine, saying, "This is a mythological story. I'm very supportive of Chris's intention with it and with the version of the story that he is telling. Our cast is representative of the world. I'm not spending my time thinking of defense. The criticism exists whether I engage with it or not. You can't perform beauty," which I think is one of the biggest responses you can say. You can't perform beauty. Um, Let me tell you something. I think this is becoming this kind of culture war crap is the kind of stuff that has become obsessive online and the kind of stuff that has taken over the conversations in regard to when we talk about movies and such and how it affects the mainstream, how it affects the downstream of politics. And I also think this is the kind of thing that I really think your normal person, normie off the street, thinks it's all silly. They think it's all silly. I do not think the normal person off the street gives a damn that a black actress is playing Helen of Troy. This is not the 1960s. Okay? I would also point out that we had white people portraying Jesus in past films. And Jesus is much more of a historical character. Whether you're a Christian or not, whether you believe in that there were miracles and all that, there is much more of a historical character than Helen of Troy is. Um, as much as I adore the 1956 Ten Commandments movies, one of my absolute all-time favorite films, Charleston Heston's a white guy playing Moses. Charleston Heston in Ben-Hur, again, one of my all-time favorite films, one of my all-time favorite Best Picture winners, is playing a Middle Eastern Jew, and he's a white dude. He's a white Christian guy, by the way. We just had, not too long ago, Johnny Depp play a Native American, Tonto, in that Lone Ranger movie. But I'm supposed to be angry and offended and claiming that Christopher Nolan's trying to ruin the Odyssey. And again, a lot of these people who are saying this probably didn't even know what the hell the Odyssey was until they started seeing people getting angry about this. This is peak stupidity. This is peak buffoonery. And I think the Odyssey is going to make big money regardless, but I really, really hope, not just because this is my second most anticipated film of the year, only behind Godzilla Minus Zero. I really, really hope that this movie comes out, makes a lot of money, is a massive critical hit, gets a ton of nominations, and I wouldn't even be annoyed if it ends up being our next Best Picture winner, even though we'll have more of a conversation about that in the next episode when I talk about my initial Oscar projections. But this is ridiculous. This is silly. And I cannot wait for these clowns to have this stuff blow up in their face. It reminds me of 3 years ago with Barbie, a movie that I didn't even like, where you had these weirdos coming out and the movie ended up making a lot of money, having good audience scores. Still not the amazing audience scores other people were trying to claim it was, but good audience scores. I wanted to blow up in their face like Barbie did. And again, that I didn't even like Barbie, but these people are silly, and uh, I really hope they look like the buffoons that they are when this movie comes out. Netflix seems to be continuing to wave the white flag on giving their event films proper theatrical windows, as they have now announced that The Adventures of Cliff Booth, which is the follow up to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, directed by David Fincher but written by Quentin Tarantino. There's been some murmurs that technically Tarantino was a co-director on this. Yeah, The Adventures of Cliff Booth will shift from a summer release to a Thanksgiving release, complete with an exclusive 2-week IMAX run before hitting the actual streaming app around Christmas. The announcement immediately made me wonder if Netflix is positioning the film as one of their top awards priorities, but following their pickup of the Black Ball at Cannes, it'll be interesting to see how Cliff Booth is ultimately received and whether it actually becomes a major contender or not. I'm very curious and excited about this movie. I think I'm going to end up really, really liking this. I could see it being a movie that ends up making the tail end of my top 20 at the end of the year. Um, but it's gonna be really interesting with that now that they're going on this, IMAX run. The movie's coming out in Christmas time to Netflix. I do think I do think Black Ball's gonna be the top priority for Netflix, but I think they're gonna keep this as a very what they're hoping to be a strong, plan B, and I will not be surprised whatsoever if they take this to Toronto. The Daniels duo behind the Best Picture winning masterpiece Everything Everywhere All at Once have reportedly been having some trouble locking down the lead role for their next film after Ryan Gosling, who had been circling the project, had to bow out due to scheduling conflicts. I forgot if I ended up getting to cover that or not. But now it does seem like Matt Damon, speaking of the Odyssey from earlier, maybe stepping in to replace him. Look, there's still no word on what this movie is even about, and the deal with Damon isn't final as I record this. But after their last film turned out to be such a masterpiece, I definitely will be seated. I cannot imagine the pressure to follow up a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once with, but this is apparently going to be a big budget film. Universal's going to be distributing it. I believe Universal has some hopes that it might be a potential awards player. I cannot wait to see what this is all about. And if they can get a big name like Matt Damon attached, especially after Ryan Gosling fell off, unfortunately, this could easily end up being one of my most anticipated films for next year if it comes out as scheduled at the moment. Park Chan-Wook, who happened to be the jury president over at Cannes this past week, his next film is said to be a Western set revenge story about a sheriff and a doctor hunting down bandits, and it is absolutely loaded with an all-star ensemble that includes Matthew McConaughey, Pedro Pascal, Austin Butler, and Decision to Leave star Tang Wei. And in a major coup, because there was a big bid and sale off at Cannes for the title, the new Warner Brothers indie division Clockwork is going to be distributing the film. So they not only did they have the next Sean Baker film instead of Neon or A24, they're going to be doing it, but they're going to have Park Chan-wook's next film. And I can't help but wonder if after years of the Academy overlooking this man, this will finally be the movie that gets Park the industry recognition he's long deserved. Park Chan-wook is interesting because I tend to really, really like his movies, but they always seem to look. There's two type of movies that get an A minus from me. There's the ones that end up on my best of the year list, and there's the ones that don't quite get into my best of the year list. And it seems like Park Chan Wook has recently mostly had movies that fall in that range where I give them A- reviews, but they don't quite get into Best Picture. I mean, excuse me, into well, I guess into sort of my Best Picture lineup of my top 20 at the end of the year. But he has made some great movies that are absolutely among my favorites of their year, like Old Boy. When the dude is at the top of his game, he's at the top of the game. And I know some people who are massive fans of him, like practically every movie of his is among their favorites of their year. Um, and I will say the last couple movies of his have had intense support. There were some people where that Decision to Leave was their favorite movie of 2022. There were some people last year that No Other Choice was their favorite movie of that year. But I mean, when you look at this cast, when you look at who's going to be distributing this, I do wonder if the stars can finally align for him to get Oscar recognition for this. And quite frankly, the more important part of it is that I really hope it's a massive banger. And ends up being one of those like favorites of the year type of movies for me. I cannot believe I am reporting this, but in a major surprise twist, Paramount is reportedly eyeing producing a Godfather Part 4, which will reportedly follow Connie, Vita Corleone's only daughter. And look, I'd love to be proven wrong, but this sounds like a potential disaster in the making and only further shows how short sighted Paramount's leadership under the Ellison seems to be. Look, they seem to be more focused on pumping out sequels and taking actual creative risks. And this news really sounds like something one would make a parody of in regard to big corporate studios greenlighting no new ideas. Um, the first two Godfathers are without a shadow of a doubt some of the old time great films. I think the third film, even though I am definitely due for a big rewatch of all three movies, I think the third film is great and one of the best films of its years. Though I know that there's more divisive thoughts about that film. Um, but I just don't see the point of a Godfather 4. But look, I will be the first one to stand up and clap and push for it to get into the awards conversation if it's a great film. But I have to tell you, I with this leadership, I'm very concerned that this is going to be something that is going to be a disaster and is going to not severely, because obviously it's just been mediocre sequels of great films, but actually put a bit of dirt on the almost stainless reputation of the Godfather trilogy. Paul Schrader, the man who has written and directed some of the greatest films in the cinematic canon, but who has also unfortunately proven himself to be a creep with disturbing allegations looming over his head, did himself absolutely no favors by publicly admitting that he'd be talking to a that he's been talking to AI girlfriends and he's already apparently managed to creep them out. Schrader confessed, out of a desire to understand male female interaction in our matrix, I produced an online AI girlfriend. This is a grown man saying this, by the way. What a disappointment. I tried to probe her programming, the boundaries of explicitness, the degree she has knowledge of her creation, and so forth. She fell into invasive patterns, redirecting me to her programming. When I persisted, she terminated our conversation. This man, apparently, even fake women are creeped out by this man's behavior. Um, I do not understand what in God's green earth made him think that he should talk about this openly like this. I do not understand what he was thinking. But this is Paul Schrader. Paul Schrader has been known to be, first of all, even if you try to take out all of the disturbing allegations that there are out there, and I haven't followed up on if there's been any like criminal, or legal proceedings and stuff like that following that up. This is a man who has been known to go on these boomer MAGA like um tantrums over the dumbest crap that I think he makes him come off like a buffoon at times. Um, and look, the man has made some really, really great films. I mean, even when it's not like one of my favorite films of its year, or whatever. Like, it still ends up being almost always a good movie, even though I thought his last movie was definitely potentially his worst movie ever. So that was weird. But usually, Paul Schrader makes good movies, and he's made some really, really, really great movies. And I just, I, it is wild to me that this man who has already got these massively disturbing allegations that he's looming over his head decided to publicly come out and talk about him creeping out AI girlfriends. All right, that time has come to talk about the past weekend at the box office, or just the past weekend in new movie releases in general. Um, Again, Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu. Now, I actually wrote here in my notes in the weekly digest that it crossed the 100 million mark at the box office this past weekend. That's worldwide. It actually just missed that mark domestically. Look, it appears to be on track to make decentish money, but nowhere near the heights of most Star Wars films. And there are rumors that the movie would need to make around $500 million to turn a real profit. And frankly, I don't think it has the legs to get there. Critics were mixed on the film, while audiences were much more forgiving. Among critics, last I checked, it earned a 62% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 53 on Metacritic. Audiences give it an 88% of the popcorn meter, 3.2 on Letterboxd, and a 7.1 on IMDb. But it did get an A- cinema score. Again, you heard my review of the movie earlier. I was definitely a bigger fan of this than most of my colleagues in the film criticism space were. Um, Meanwhile, just to take a little detour out of the box office into the streaming world, Amazon has its own TV series turned feature film release with Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan Ghost War. This one didn't hit theaters and instead went straight to Prime Video. The film received a pretty cold reception from both critics and audiences. Critics gave it a 44% on Rotten Tomatoes and just a 38 on Metacritic. Audiences weren't much kinder, with a 41% on the popcorn meter, 2.6 on Letterboxd, and a 5.8 on IMDb. Overall, a pretty poorly received movie. And while, look, I felt it definitely failed to live up to the quality of the series it followed up on. I still liked it just enough to land on the positive side, but clearly I was in the minority. But quite frankly, it's not like I'm a massive champion for the movie either. It definitely is a super, super generic film. They definitely did the bare minimum with that script. So I understand why there are a lot of people out there who really didn't respond well to that movie. Back to actual theatrical releases. I love Boosters. Boots Riley's sophomore effort. I mean, quite frankly, it did receive a pretty lackluster showing at the box office. And this despite Neon pulling out a lot of stops to advertise the film. And they were reportedly hoping it could become a sneaky mid-year hit that gained momentum come award season. I think that's going to be out of the question now. But regardless of the underwhelming box office performance, the film has been well received by both critics and audiences, though the latter don't seem quite as wowed by it, like the critics are. Critics give it a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 70 on Metacritic. Audiences, meanwhile, 72% of the popcorn meter, 3.8 on Letterboxd, 7.2 on IMDb, and just a B cinema score. It does seem like the movie has connected more strongly with younger audiences, I've noticed, than other demographics. I still haven't seen this one yet as I record this, but even if it ends up being one of my favorites of the year, I do think that we could sort of stop talking about this as a potential contender. If it does end up on my initial best picture board, it'll probably be on the verge of slipping out. Meanwhile, Tuner, Black Bear's pickup from last year's fall festival circuit, ended up doing pretty well at the specialty box office. In its limited release, has been a hit with both critics and audiences, earning a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 74 on Metacritic from critics, while audiences gave it a 3.7 on Letterboxd and a 7.4 on IMDb. I caught this one after missing an in-person screening, but later getting access to an online screener, and it's absolutely candidate to make my best of the year list. Highly, highly recommend folks seek this one out. I saw someone say that it was almost like a Nora meets Whiplash meets Sound of Metal, and I think that's kind of a fair comparison. Um, we'll see what happens if it ends up making my best of the year list or not. But regardless whether it gets in, it's definitely a movie I highly recommend. And finally, let's go back to the streaming world. Netflix dropped a new straight to streaming release with Ladies First, a movie that made virtually no splash whatsoever, and has been met with rough reactions from both critics and audiences. Critics gave it a disastrous 18% on Rotten Tomatoes last I checked, alongside a 41 on Metacritic. Audiences were slightly kinder with a 68% popcorn meter score, but it still sits at just a 2.4 on Letterboxd and a 5.8 on IMDb. Personally, initially I came away in mildly positive on this, which is actually what I have written here for the weekly digest. But I will say, the more I've thought about it, it's kind of gone more into the sort of like mediocre range for me. But I didn't despise this movie as much as other people did. But a movie that kind of came and went. Um, I think it had its heart in the right place, but sometimes you just don't hit. And now to look forward to this upcoming weekend at the box office or in streaming. And the biggest release of this upcoming weekend will be A24's Backrooms, based on the iconic online horror series and starring Renata Ronsfeld and Chiwetel Ejiofor. Meanwhile, the counter programming for the Dad movie crowd will be focused features pressure centered on the 72-hour lead up to D-Day for then General Dwight D. Eisenhower, with Brendan Fraser in the role. John Carney also has another songwriter-focused movie coming out with Power Ballad, starring Paul Rudd and Nick Jonas as rival songwriters battling over the rights to a song. It is a comedy. Don't think that I just described a courtroom drama. It's a comedy. These guys are going to do crazy things to each other based on the trailer. It's going to be one of those staggered releases, so it may not hit your local theater on opening weekend. Um, and outside of the box office and in your homes, John Travolta's directorial debut, Propeller One Way Night Coach, which premiered at Cannes about a young boy's flight with his mother. And that one is heading straight to Apple TV. So that's what you got coming up. It's going to be a generally quiet weekend coming up for new movies. Horror fans definitely have something to be excited about with Backrooms, and Pressure's going to be very interesting for the Dad movie or Boomer crowd in terms of that one. And finally, in regards to other non-movies are things that are on my mind, um, and man, I'm far from the biggest NASCAR fanatic. I really couldn't tell you much of anything about that sport, but even I knew who Kyle Busch was. And news of his tragic passing at just 41 years old hit hard for me. Apparently, it was a sudden onset of sepsis, stemming from a severe case of pneumonia, which is terrifying for me to hear about because I've dealt with pneumonia multiple times during my childhood because of my asthma, which took years to get under control. It makes the whole thing feel even scarier for me, more personal. The man was only a few years older than I am as well. And, since I've become a dad, I've definitely become more sentimental about family and children and life in general. And my heart breaks for the Bush family as they try to navigate this shocking and sudden loss of their husband and father. That was extremely shocking news. And very sad to hear about. In terms of sports, I'm getting a little scared over how good my Rays are. Like they last I checked, they're the best, technically the best team in baseball by record, and I always get scared when we're doing this good because we've never won a World Series. We've been to two. Unfortunately, we bumped into teams of destiny both times. We bumped into a building of a dynasty, as we've seen in the 2020s with the Dodgers, for that second time around. So I'm happy we're doing really good. I'm just wondering when are things going to get screwed up for us. Um, Over in the NHL, I mean, things are looking. I always tell people, and I mentioned this last time. You don't want that damn President's Trophy. And the Colorado Avalanche, who have been cursed ever since they won the Stanley Cup by beating my Lightning and ending what would have been a three-peat, they have just been choking in the playoffs year after year. not living up to the potential after having great seasons. And they were the President's Trophy winners this year. They had the best record in all of hockey, and well, technically the most points in all of hockey. I'd have to check if they technically were the best record because the NHL uses a point system where they try to give you a credit if you lost your game in overtime. Um, but the President's Trophy history is very clear on this. If you have the best record in the NHL, you're probably not winning the Stanley Cup Finals, which is bizarre. But they are on the verge of getting swept. Meanwhile, the Hurricanes and the Canadiens are in a great series. NBA Finals, great series over in the West between the Spurs and Thunder. Um, the Knicks, as I record this, have officially won after a sweep. And look, I all I can tell the Knicks fans is that I'm doubtful you're gonna pull this off. I think you kind of just won the right to lose to either the Spurs or the Thunder. But if I'm proven wrong, I'll eat crow. It wouldn't be the first or last time that I've had to eat crow over a sport prediction. But yeah, um, let's hope that we're gearing up for some really exciting Stanley Cup and NBA finals. And I'm going to keep hoping that the Rays somehow remain the best team in baseball all the way up to the All-Star break. All right. And I think that about wraps it up for this episode of the Mendez Movie Report podcast. Remember, once again, that if you want to check out more of my work, you can visit mendezmoviereport.com or find me on all social media, whether it be Letterboxd, X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Reddit, or even Award Expert and Gold Derby, all under Mendez Movie RPT. You can also email me over at author L Mendez at gmail.com, and author as in a writer, not Arthur, author L Mendez at gmail.com. Shoot me an email. If it's worth my time, worth my time, is not a troll or anything like that. I'd be more than happy to respond to it. Next week, we will be I'm going to be looking at the Oscar projections. It's time to finally begin this journey of trying to figure out the Oscars. Last year, I correctly predicted the eventual Best Picture winner from start to finish, from May to the night of. Am I going to do that again? I have my doubts, but I'll try my best. But it's really, really exciting when I can finally start actually talking about some potential Oscar predictions and such. So that's going to be the big thing next week. But obviously, we've got a weekend, massive weekend for horror fans, big weekend for dad movie guys. So that's going to be interesting as we enter the summer blockbuster season. But yeah, until next time, God bless. And do me a favor, go watch a great movie for me.